Good afternoon and welcome to We Love History Live. I'm Alison from Historic Environment Scotland, and over the past few months we have taken the opportunity to host a series of live stream events which really have been aimed at giving you some insight into our work here at Historic Environment Scotland, and also to give you the opportunity to ask us some questions. So this is a live stream event. It is a live stream event, but it's also a Q&A. So if you would like to ask us questions, you are very welcome to do so. In order to do that, what you'll need to do is log on to YouTube using your Google account and then type any questions that you might have into the box below the video screen. So without further ado, today's topic is the arts and crafts movement and its specific influence here in Scotland. the idea for the topic really came about when we were preparing the Great Scottish Interiors exhibition. This is an online exhibition featuring some of Scotland's most distinctive interiors, and you can take a look at it on the HES website whenever you'd like to. But really, as we were drawing together the exhibition, what was very striking to us was that most of, if not all, of the interiors featured in that exhibition were in some way influenced by or influential in the arts and crafts movement in Scotland. So without further ado, I would love to invite my colleague Simon Green to come and talk to us on the topic. Simon is a distinguished architectural historian and very well versed in the arts and crafts movement in Scotland. Hi Simon.
Good afternoon.
So I guess the conversation. I know that a lot of people watching will have heard the term arts and crafts sort of thrown around, but won't really know much about the origins of the term, where it came from, and what we mean when we talk about arts and crafts, architecture and design. So I wondered if you could give us a bit of an intro into the movement.
A pleasure. It's quite a complex story, but basically a very important designer and publisher, poet, writer, socialist, activist, and many other attributes, William Morris, was one of the founding fathers of the arts and crafts movement, which is really a rejection of things being factory made. And the idea of honest labour, of creation by hand of beautiful things, and surrounding yourself with things that are handmade and craft made. And this was really a reaction to the industrialization of the 19th century. So this developed during the 19th century, and William Morris and his friends were at the vanguard, creating amazing tapestries, textiles, stained glass, and creating a very rich, very, very complex interiors. And then the second generation of designers simplified this, and that's where we really see what we think of being as high arts and crafts, which are much more traditional construction of buildings, looking at historic buildings, which is always an important part, looking at our history, and in Scotland, really the buildings of the 16th and 17th centuries.
Gosh, yeah.
Then handmade furniture, and is one of the main themes.
That's interesting. It's fascinating what you're saying about handmade objects and making. And I know that there were a lot of I guess decorative arts suddenly got had an importance in arts and crafts movement that they didn't necessarily have before.
Very much so, and it was about the doing and the crafting and being involved. And the commissioning of people that who are expert in their craft, and it wasn't, you didn't want something exactly the same as everybody else. You wanted something that was slightly different. And so, for example, we now think of the tapestry kits being something you give grandma at Christmas. But in the 19th, but William Morris made, and especially his daughter May Morris, produced amazing tapestry kits. So ladies and the occasional gentleman could sit at home making tapestries.
Oh, fantastic!
Needlepoint, etc., etc. So it was about about doing as well as enjoying, and it's all about touch and fondling beautiful things.
Lovely. So did in terms of how that translated up into Scotland, what influence did Morris have, and who were the main practitioners here up in Scotland?
Well, Morris had a tremendous influence throughout Scotland, although never particularly liked Scotland, but described the new town of Edinburgh as looking like the devil's drawing room. And if ever I want to die somewhere, I'll commit suicide in Edinburgh. but he loved landscape. He loved the landscape, and he. But his design, his text, his stained glass is found throughout Scotland. Morris and Co. stained glass by his friends Burne-Jones and Rossetti and Philip Webb, as well as himself. And his fabrics were everywhere in the 19th century, and his textiles, his tapestries. And so it was a very wide-ranging, his furniture, etc., was throughout Scotland.
So it's quite a fashionable item to have in your house then in the 19th century.
Oh, very much so. And Robert Lorimer, who designed Ardkinglas House, which we'll see shortly, he was one of the principal proponents of the arts and crafts movement in Scotland. And here Lorimer was inspired by 16th and 17th century Scottish tower houses and castles to create a very large new country house, but which fits into a Scottish idiom, and is a very comfortable, practical home full of beautiful things. And the billiard room, which you see here, it shows you these wonderful sculptures of these monkey sculptures, which are newel posts. So you're actually intentionally intended to fondle them, to actually caress them as you descend from the smoking room into the billiard room. And it's all about texture and design and craft.
Yeah. So Lorimer was one of those figures who really kind of translated it, I guess, into a Scottish, I guess, vernacular or style or.
Yes, and I think it's a curious thing because it's almost an approach rather than a style, because in England arts and crafts looks very different because it's not using, whereas in Scotland the influence was from Scottish buildings for architecture. Therefore, and in England, it looked at various other English sources. So it is different, but I think that's the fascinating thing about it, in that it changes shape and form because it's this approach to something that isn't Georgian or isn't classical and isn't Gothic, and saying this is something very different.
I like the idea of uniqueness in that as well, and the idea that things weren't the same everywhere.
And it's a big change from the previous, from the Victorian period, where you wanted to keep up with the Joneses, and so you had things that were identical, mass-produced, and suddenly you're getting the bespoke, and so it's quite a big change. But that's part of the wonderful nature of it.
I was going to say that obviously that's such an interesting way of looking at it, because the other famous arts and crafts interior in Scotland that we'll refer to is Hill House, and we call them both Ardkinglas and Hill House arts and crafts houses, but they're translated in very different styles.
Absolutely, and Mackintosh is a spectacular designer, and it creates amazing buildings. And this, although it looks very different from Ardkinglas, is Hill House in Helensburgh. But it's yet again, it's inspired by Scottish architecture, and Mackintosh is fascinated by the plasticity of Harl. This white Harl could cover everything and produce these beautiful flowing shapes, but all inspired by Scottish architecture. So there's crowstep gables and there's turrets, and it's all there, but it's translated in a slightly different way, which is always fascinating. I think that contrast, that Lorimer and Mackintosh were contemporaries, one East Coast, one West Coast, and so it's really fascinating, how that relates. And then the other principal player on an international stage was the architect of Melsetter, William Letherby, which we saw earlier on. But here, and yet again here, Letherby takes an old house, the Melsetter house of the Moody family, and extends it and to create a new house for Theodosia and Thomas Middlemore.
Theodosia is a wonderful name.
Yes, but yet again using Scottish details and responding to the environment to create a magical place. And if we look at we have a couple of images from the interior. This is of Melsetter, taken in about 1900, when the Middlemores were in residence. And this is the hall looking through into the drawing room. And Theodosia was a very keen needlewoman. And she and May Morris, her great friend, William Morris's daughter, created a lot of the textiles in the house. Plus, they commissioned tapestries from Morris and Co. And the carpet. There's a carpet on the table in front, in the middle of the image, which is a Morris and Co. Design. And so these rich white interiors are full of exquisite textiles. And so it's this overlay of craft and design on a beautiful pale interior. So if you go to the next image, you'll see Theodosia in her dining room.
Gosh.
Sitting by her fire, and the dining room has plasterwork by Ernest Jimpson, who was based in the Cotswolds at this point, and is a very important designer of plasterwork and metalwork and woodwork. And he produces beautiful plasterwork in this room, the wonderful welcoming fire. So it's looking, Letherby's producing an interior that's looking back to times gone by, very comfortable, very homely, but a grand house by any standards.
Gosh, I've had a question through from Dawn. And Dawn wants to know, obviously we've talked about, touched on the influence of Morris's ideas in Scotland, but Dawn wants to know, to what extent did Scottish architects and designers influence the arts and crafts movement in England? So if we flip it on its head.
Well, absolutely. Well, there's quite an interesting story there, because a number of the key players in England had Scottish roots. So the Art Workers Guild is one of the main sort of focus, still an active focus of the arts and crafts movement in London. And their headquarters was designed by F.W. Troop, who's a Scot from Elgin. There's a very famous ladderback chair that appears in all arts and crafts interiors that was designed by originally by a chap called Clisset, who's a chair bodger in Herefordshire. But the person who's believed to have found Clisset and thought this is a beautiful design is Maclaren, who designed Fortingal and was a Scot as well, who was educated in Stirling. So there are lots more connections, and I spent a little bit of time thinking about this. But people like Norman Shaw, who's a very important, slightly older architect, he had Scottish roots. And J.J. Stevenson, who was a leader of the Sweetness and Light movement, which then led on to the arts and crafts movement, was a Scot. So there's very interesting relationship between Scotland and England in the arts and crafts movement. Although obviously Morris and Ruskin are the generators, but Thomas Carlyle was also another Scot, was also a great influence on the pre-period of arts and crafts movement. So Dawn, there are lots of Scottish links, and it couldn't have happened without Scotland.
Absolutely. It's great to see the interplay between the two. Looking at Theodosia in her interior, and also her relationship with May Morris, I guess highlighted to me something that was great about the arts and crafts movement and quite progressive was the role of the female artist or craftsperson in
Yes, very much so. And Theodosia is in her very racily in her artistic dress, which is actually unstructured clothing for a middle-aged woman at the turn of the century. Was so her whalebone corsets are gone.
They're out the window.
They're out the window, and she's wearing this very flowing frock. But no, so she was a very keen needlewoman. But people like there are a great number of women: Phoebe Traquair, the great mural artist, an enamelist, and painter, and there's wonderful examples of her work for example, in the National Museum in Edinburgh, including a spectacular piano designed by Lorimer and painted by Phoebe Jacquer. We also, in the Great Interiors exhibition, have a wonderful example of the work of Margaret MacDonald, who's the wife of Charles Henry Mackintosh. And this is the a Sleeping Princess panel, which sits above the fireplace in Hill House. And so there are, and this is a view of it here.
Wow.
And this is a large gesso panel with exquisite colouring, and it really brings together the story behind the drawing room, which is about in Hill House, which is a garden, and with a briar rose, and there are petals falling, and this painting, or this panel, really brings the story of the whole room together. And Mackintosh and Margaret MacDonald Charles Mackintosh and Margaret MacDonald worked very, very closely together. And Mackintosh said he didn't know where her influence began and ended. And so that she was inherently important in all his design. And so here you have this panel is located above the fireplace in the drawing room, and you see it here. And if we pan out a bit, you will see how the room, although it's arranged for showing, with this exquisite decoration on the walls, and the decoration on the fireplace, and then this and a wonderful antimacassar on the sofa. Antimacassars seem to be rather unfashionable now, but when you have Mackintosh, Margaret MacDonald designed ones with beadwork, they take on a different world than something to stop your sofa being stained.
But so I'm not even familiar with this as an object, Simon. So it's called an antimacassar, you say?
Yeah, which is the cloth covering on the back of the sofa. You see those panels on the back of the sofa. That is it's a cloth panel to protect the fabric below.
Gosh, and yeah, and the level of detail is extraordinary.
And it's one of these things where the idea that actually comes really it starts with Robert Adam, which seems many years ago, and of a whole artwork, a room being all designed as a piece. The wonderful German expression Gesamtkunstwerk, a whole artwork.
Wow.
And Lorimer does this, and Charles Mackintosh takes it to another extreme, creating the whole room as a single story.
Gosh, it's incredible the way the entire interior at Hill House does link together, and even down to the bits of fabric you sling over your sofa to collect the crumbs.
Absolutely, and I think that, and there's what's fascinating is there's very little space for the owner of the house to have any say beyond the commissioning of the artwork. So it's it's fascinating, and only the dining room at Hill House was the main room where the Blackie family brought their own furniture.
So this very dark dining room here, yeah,
which is the traditional sort of late 19th century furniture, which you'd expect in a turkey rug, but with Mackintosh paneling and wonderful Mackintosh light fittings. But that was the only main principal room that had furniture that they brought elsewhere, as Mackintosh was in, and Margaret MacDonald was in charge everywhere else. The light fitting is spectacular, but yet again, it's about the quality of light.
Yeah. And
that was another important thing about arts and crafts interiors was light and access between the house and the garden, and the sort of how things could be used, touched. You know, I talked about fondling the newel posts going to the billiard room. If you go to every door, every window latch at Hill House is exquisite.
Gosh.
Here we have an example, and they're just beautiful things. And it's all about that being handmade or designed and cast possibly, but beautifully burnished so that it's such a beautiful thing to hold.
It's incredible to just you know, it does make you want to hold it, and it's so organic in its form. On the topic of the applied arts and tactile objects, Emma has asked us a question. So Emma wants to know if you have any particular favourite practitioners amongst the applied arts in Scotland. So who of these marvellous craftspeople kind of floats your boat?
It's the sort of the one I'm currently looking at, probably. You know, it's always Thomas Haddon is magical, who did all the metalwork for Lorimer. And in the collection at John Sinclair House, we have at the HES National Record, we have, for example, the prototype for the chain that Thomas Haddon made that St Michael hangs in the National War Memorial in the castle. We have the prototype for it, and it's the most exquisite bit of metalwork. But also, you know, there are so many things. You know, if you go into the National Museum, all the Lorimer furniture that's on display, they're beautifully made by people like Scott Morton and Co, who did the woodwork at Ardkinglas or Whittaker and Reed. And it's but it's a really attention to detail, and you looking at historic examples, but then translating them into something new. And it's that love of craft and of texture and of wood. So I get very excited. But and a more contemporary craftsman is Tim Stead, who's now dead. But his house, the Stedding,
the Stedding
is full of the most incredible handmade furniture. And his response to design is amazing, or was amazing, and his love of wood is shown throughout the building. But also it's where I always find it's the latest thing I find I'm looking at that gets more interesting, especially with the arts and crafts movement and arts and crafts designers. Just spending some time with a Phoebe Chaquet painting or a piece of tapestry, and you suddenly discover things and how the quirks. But Ardkinglas is just so full of all these sort of details that I just get slightly overexcited when I go there, because you begin to look. Well, here you are. For example, the fireplace in the smoking room, which sits above the billiard room, open to it. Here you have a mixture of antique Delft tiles, wonderful woodwork, the complexity of the fire irons and the grate and everything, which is Thomas Haddon, all come together, and there's a wonderful hearth which curves out to welcome you. And Lorimer also had his specific design for firebacks, so they could reflect the most heat. So everything is thought about. So, but you do want to touch everything. It's a sort of curator's nightmare.
I'm interested to know how to touch on what the relationships were like, because there seems to be some incredibly close collaborations. Mackintosh and Margaret MacDonald you mentioned, and then you mentioned that Lorimer had worked on a piano with Phoebe Chaquet as well. So how did these collaborations come about?
Well, it varies. I think that the arts and crafts movement, with Morris at its lead, was all about collaboration. And so Morris and Burne-Jones, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, as students, painted the ceilings of the Oxford Union building. And then they went on to decorate Morris's first house, Red House, in Bexley Heath. And likewise, Lorimer worked very close, spent a lot of time sketching and drawing, and then translated those things with the craftsmen he got on best with. And so he worked very closely, and so much so that the first big biography of Lorimer by Peter Savage, which was published in about 1980, it's called Robert Lorimer and the Edinburgh Craft Designers, because they worked so closely together. So the likes of the Beattie and Sam Wilson in plasterwork, Scott Morton for woodwork, Thomas Haddon for metalwork, the Clow brothers for carving, and they all worked together. And in our collections, we're very lucky to have the office collection of Lorimer's drawings, and we have hundreds and hundreds of details of all these things where they're looking in great, and we can trace them from Lorimer's sketchbook when he's getting the idea to how then it's translated into a real thing.
Fantastic. So it's very much led by Lorimer in that instance. He would conceive of the idea. Yeah.
Lorimer liked to be in control.
Yeah.
Whereas I think certain other architects are a bit more fluid and let their craftsmen have a bit more say. But Lorimer did like to be in control.
Excellent. And just to move on the discussion, so we've talked about these figures that were incredibly influential in Scotland and in arts and crafts, and I just wanted to sort of bring the conversation forward to more contemporary interiors and buildings, and ask you really about your impressions of the enduring influence of the arts and crafts movement. You know, where do we still see it?
Well, I think it's a fascinating thing because you can obviously see the historic objects in places like the museum, and there's a house called Marchmont in the Borders where the present owner has put together a major collection of arts and crafts furniture. And it's in a house that Lorimer altered. But also, there's an enduring arts and crafts ethos that's seen in lots of contemporary work. And the Dovecote Studios, which is in the old Infirmary Street Baths in Edinburgh, is a tapestry weaving workshop and gallery that was founded by the Noble family and the Marquis of Bute in the early 20th century, and is still going.
Gosh, it's amazing that a traditional skill, yeah.
Traditional skills, and they're doing it all. So that's one example. But also the very important historian Sir Nicholas Pevsner, in his writings on the creation of the modern movement, drew a very clear line between the arts and crafts movement and international modernism. And so it's quite interesting that it's been slightly debunked, but there's definitely this idea of practicality. Things you need to be able to hold a handle beautifully. Yes, it may not be each time it's designed specifically, but a beautiful door handle, a beautiful doorknob, a light switch that works properly, a beautiful piece of furniture.
It can be functionality. Yeah.
So that comes through to the modern movement, and so in contrast to the Tim Stead house at Steading, which is everything is bespoke. High Sunderland which was in the exhibition, is an example where it's definitely mid-20th century modern. It is modernism, built in the 1950s for a designer, and it's absolutely a stunning thing. But everything is bespoke.
Wow,
it's mass made. He was a fabric designer and produced the most incredible interiors. But it's all about the detail, and hopefully we may see an image of it. But
yeah. Oh well. Yeah. The High Sunderland interior.
Yes.
it's brilliant. It's the richness of materials as well as something that comes across, and that again tactileness of the marble and
yes, and it's about and every piece of furniture is either specifically designed or made by a particular craftsman. So here you have a view of the sunken sitting area with what they describe as the library beyond.
Gosh, yeah.
And each piece is handmade, but the colours of the cushions are very deliberate, and they are arranged in particular order. Bernard Klein, the owner, was the most precise person ever, and his daughter has just written a wonderful book on the subject, and it really does show how pernickety he was, I think would be a polite way of putting it. But and colour gradation, and how important colour and light and texture are, all things that go way back into William Morris. So it's so it all relates beautifully. But it's not the only element, but the arts and crafts movement is an influence throughout it. And I think it's very easy to say it's a very simple story. It isn't. And the designer, the architect Peter Womersley, would be turning in his grave if he thought I was describing High Sunderland as an arts and crafts house. But it has amazing arts and crafts elements within it. This craft and the very, very strong vision of the art. And High Sunderland is unique because the artist owner and the architect worked very, very closely on the design and on all alterations to the house over until until very recently. The family recently sold it. But here's a view. You're basically looking in the opposite direction, looking out of the window, and this is a sunken sitting area, so you actually sit at grass level.
Oh wow!
And it's just the most amazing interior. And with these different spaces and different quality of light, but are surrounded by amazing textures.
It's incredible. I guess it's, do you think there's anything we can learn, Simon, from the arts and crafts movement? When we're coming to designing buildings today.
I think it's very simple, really. It's about being fit for purpose, and yes, these very grand big houses like Melset or Arkinglas were for very large, entertaining, but everything is about but they fit what you need to do in them, but also that thing about the Morris idea that you should only have things that are useful and beautiful. And in lockdown we should have been getting rid of anything we didn't like.
Yeah.
But
great opportunity to do a declutter.
Yes, but also it's that thing about the arts and crafts movement is really about practicality and beauty, and the union of those two things. And it can be about clutter. Clutter's not a bad thing, especially if you love dusting. But and minimalism isn't for everybody. So as you can see from the room around me, but I suppose in a sense it's about honesty in the sense of beautiful materials, and perhaps it's better to wait until you can get the best rather than compromise.
Excellent. On that note, Simon, I think that's all we've got time for today, but it's been wonderful and instructive, and I hope you've enjoyed watching us. To everyone who's tuned in, and I'd like to say a big thank you from me.
And thank you. And thank you, Alison.
All right, thank you, Simon.